We were just talking about how we had the idea for this show, and it was about 2 years ago. We were at Sonderman Park with our kids who decided to like work on this structure that some other kids had probably started. And we were taking pictures of the kids with all the like trees and sticks and like talking about how they just like, I don't know, like interact with nature different than adults do. So it was like they just came and decided that there was this job that they wanted to do randomly, and we're just
right
like so focused and into it. Yeah. And I had a show with Abby the next month, and I was like, hey, Peta and I were talking about doing a show about childhood because I was just barely starting to do figures. And then I think a couple months later, Abby was like, so do you really want to do that? And here we are now, 2 years later.
Yeah. I paint a lot of figures, and I also paint a lot of landscapes. And I feel like this year has been a really bizarre year for me, that just kind of my whole life has kind of flipped upside down or right side up. I've been saying lately, because it feels almost like for a very long time I've been living in like an upside down realm. I have 7 children, and currently there are 5 still at home, and their ages are from 29 to 3, almost 4. And my life is crazy. I have been taking care of my mom for almost 22 years. And on October 16th, all of that kind of came to a halt. I dropped her off at the hospital and decided I could no longer continue to care for her. But at the beginning of this year, I did a lot of work on just exploring the relationship between my mother and I, as like myself as a caregiver, and her, as my mother, and how weird that relationship has been. And I felt like I really processed a whole lot of stuff that had been hidden. And going into this show for me was a continuation of that work, where I began to explore my inner child and try to heal those parts of me that had been neglected for decades. I had a different idea in mind when we started when we started thinking about this show. It seemed more magical and more like a different world, like these children living in a different world. There weren't any grown-ups involved. Everything was nature and children. And then it all just started changing.
Yeah, we had this plan at the beginning. We were like, we're going to paint each other's kids, and we're going to like do all this collaboration. And instead it basically devolved to like random texts every couple of weeks of how desperate we were, because both of our lives had like so much stuff in the past 3 months that it almost felt like, I don't know, it's like, is there even time to paint? Is there even any point in painting? Like, if life has decided that all of these other things have to come first, and you can't say no to the sick kid, or you can't say no to the other relatives you're taking care of, like what does that leave? So it felt like we were both just like kind of barely clinging to this thing that's like really important and kind of intrinsic to both of us.
Yeah, we finally collaborated yesterday. I went to Audrey's house. And what had happened was that, yes, like Audrey and I had every intention to get together and plan out this show. And we exchanged probably 5, like we made plans 4 or 5 different times to get together and like figure out what we were doing. We thought we were, I'm going to paint your kid, you're going to paint my kid, we're going to paint, we're going to do these things. And then every single time something came up and we did not get together. And then we said, it's okay, we'll try again next week. And when we were talking at Audrey's, I was like, well, what happened this year? Like, I couldn't even remember what had happened. And so I started looking through my photographs, and I wrote down on a piece of paper like the number of times that I got to work on paintings, And in the month of July, I got to work on art 2 days. In the month of August, I got to work on art 11 days. In the month of September, I got 4 days. And in the month of October, I got 14. That totals up to 30 days of getting to paint. And my husband's mom passed away in June. All of our kids, except for one, have birthdays between April and August. My daughter moved to Boulder to go to college. My anniversary is in July. We got a dog in July, which was probably a really bad idea, especially since she's so neurotic. And so it was a lot of things, and you forget. And then on the 16th of October, I hospitalized my mom. And then it was a race to the finish line, It was like, there was one day where, it was 3 days. I did 6 paintings in 3 days. And, I don't get periods of time to paint for longer than, like, the max that I get is maybe 4 hours. Everything is rushed. And I don't like living like that.
Yeah, I felt like this show, I learned how to paint in like 1 to 2 hour increments instead of like 8-hour increments. I think I had, for that big piece, I did like 2 6-hour sessions, but everything else is like, you have to fit it into like this hour. This is how much you have today.
This is what you have, yeah.
So yeah, it was really interesting how even though we didn't do any collaboration, we both had so much stuff come up that I had dozens of planned painting days that were like,
that just fell through every
you're
time.
going to Denver, no, you're doing this other thing. But it's like really interesting because our first 2 paintings that each of us chose, mine was that one of those 2 kids on that rock, and hers was those 2 kids on that rock. And then we both did ocean paintings, and we both did like yours there and mine of Solly over there, like almost the same pose.
Yeah.
And then we both did a kid with an animal, the ones behind us. So it was really interesting how even though we were basically hardly communicating, it really somehow we were kind of in a same really similar place in our lives, and it worked.
Yeah. And I was thinking about like how all of that happened, and how similar people's lives are, especially mothers that are making art. And, like if you look in Audrey's phone and you look in my phone, you're going to see a lot of the same stuff, and that's where our images came from our experiences in raising our children and watching them play and seeing the world kind of through their eyes. I think like another component for me was your dad, who helped me with my ceramic pieces. I had a point where I started, a friend of mine, Talise Rodel, who moved out to, I think she moved to Texas and then to Florida, but she sent me a book about inner child work, and it talks about using your non-dominant hand to write and then answer with your dominant hand. And so I decided to use my non-dominant hand to paint my backgrounds. And just, it wasn't like I was looking for answers. I was just trying to get in touch with that feeling, with that space, that child space. And it really started to open up a lot of that sensation of learning how to write, learning how to draw, the frustration of not having control over your hand. I remember very distinctly as a child, my frustration at not being able to draw like an adult. I was never satisfied with anything that I could do as a child.
It's never good enough.
Yeah, it was like, what is wrong with this? I did what you did and it doesn't look the same. And as I did that, I also had this moment where I thought, what would it look like if there were altars to that inner child? What would that look like, and what would that mean to me or to anybody else? How would I speak to myself? What sort of gifts would you bring your inner child? What sorts of prayers would you say for them? What sorts of words would you give them? And that, started the whole the playing with the clay. So when I started working, actually the little vase with the two girls was the first piece that I did. And I always just pull out a piece of clay and just start going. I don't know what I'm doing. I just start going. And then usually I'm like, oh, I feel great about this. This is a good start because I'm not thinking and I'm just feeling. And then I go into like the next piece. And then I do something really like that doesn't work because it's structurally not sound. And then the piece is like falling apart. You know, I did this during my last show with a pelvis. And I'm like, what is happening here? But I remembered, my advice from Frank last time, and then I started to really just think about the structure and think about maybe working smaller and not going so big immediately. And then I started working on smaller pieces and kind of building up from there. And so all of these little sculptures are altars to the inner child that would allow a person to, communicate with themselves in a way that is like sacred and holy and, kind and loving. And I think I forgot what the other thing that I was thinking of was. Anyway, go ahead.
I don't feel like I really did inner child work during this one. I think that's where like really different, and I think it's really interesting that you like really delved into that. For me, it was more like paying attention to the kids in my life, like how are you interacting with nature? How is it different? Because I focused so much on landscapes for my past, I don't know, 10 years of work, and like for me it was like how do I learn how to paint the figure? Is it possible? Like with my limited palette, how does that work? And but also like really focusing on like how kids connect to nature in such a like different, more direct way than we do.
I took that whole, observation of the children too, after I had put my mom in the hospital, and I was really struggling for the next 2 weeks with a lot of shame and a lot of guilt and a lot of awful feelings about myself. It was almost time to turn in our work. And I was like, oh, there are these pieces that I started months ago, and I'll start one piece and I'll do like real quick, like just a little bit of time, work on it, and then something will happen, and then I'll leave that, and then I'll, work on another piece. Sometimes I'll work on like 5 pieces at the same time. But I had this piece, that piece, and I think the one of Petra. I had 3, was that 3 or, yeah, it was 3 pieces that weren't finished. And when I sat down to try and work on them, it was so painful. I had so much pain inside of me that I just I couldn't do it. I could not put any more in. And then I started thinking about my kids and how when they are playing and then they're done, they just leave their shit all over the house. They just leave it there for me, right?
As they do.
And when they're doing a drawing, like they do a drawing and then they leave it there, and then they don't go, oh, I've got to go back and finish that. That's not complete enough. And I took a cue from my children, and I left the paintings as they were, and I varnished them, and I just let it go. And I always mention, how the work that I'm doing is a perfect reflection of what is happening in my life at the time. And I feel like that is so true, especially here, that, this is what it is. This is the best I could do. It might not be the best that my skill can achieve, but this is what I can do in the life that I have. So
the other thing about working when you're on like such a tight schedule, though, I feel like it makes you make a decision.
Yeah.
Whereas otherwise you might like sit and be like,
think
I
about
don't know what
things.
to do and think about it. And sometimes that immediacy like is better.
Yeah.
Like I know that sometimes when I try and do a small study and then do a bigger one, it's like not as good. And I feel like this kind of forces you to just be like, for good or bad, this is the choice we're making because we only have this 2 hours right now and you need to accomplish something.
Yeah.
So
anyway, I think that's all I have to say.
Does anyone have any questions for either of us?
Not a question. I think you should describe your
Oh, yes, please.
That was my question.
Okay, so I gather different colors of dirt, sometimes soft rocks, mostly from road cuts, because it's convenient and because the earth's already really disturbed there and it's easy to get something that is like a more pure color. And then I grind, usually using a blender, also because I'm lazy, and sieve the dirt, and then I put clear acrylic paint down and put the dirt on top in little sections. So all of the colors that I use are like natural, real colors that I have found. There's nothing artificial or added, and that's why there's no blue, and that's why a lot of times there's not like a whole lot of, it's hard to find like really dark darks or really light lights, but I do have some coal dust from Durango and some white volcanic ash from Salida, which helps with that, but it does tend to be kind of that middle value.
I love hearing both of your process because it's very, like, when you're talking about being mothers and having, and motherhood and children and the theme, but yet the way you talk about like approaching writing with your right hand, playing with the blender, gathering rocks, that's very childlike. So I love that it seems like this works. Like it was meant to be the way it panned out,
Yeah,
and,
for sure.
So it's fun to see how you guys have, kind of live vicariously through your child and children.
I feel like we both like gained a lot artistically through the show.
Yeah.
And did things that otherwise we might not have done. And
definitely.
Yeah, no, it's nice. Like it was not nice producing this work under this amount of pressure, but it's nice to feel like that it's still that important to you. That like I'm gonna get home from work at 11 and work until 3 so that I can have this piece. Like it's important to know how like intrinsic it is and how you still need to do it even when everything else is crazy.
That question that you asked about whether or not we should be spending our time doing this, like there is this like this feeling of like what are we, I know I've had the thoughts in my head before, what am I taking away from my family by doing this, which feels really terrible inside, and it probably contributes to how quickly I work because I don't want to take away from them, but I also don't want to see their mother give up what she's passionate about, to, care for everyone else all of the time, even though it feels like I'm doing that all the time. So.
What are their responses, your children's responses to this magnificent show?
Well, my children love it, and they love when I'm creating something, and they, a lot of the times they'll come into the studio and they'll be working on something, or if I'm in the ceramic studio, they'll come out and want to play as well. But yeah, they love it, and it's a part of their lives, and they're also used to posing for me, and contorting into weird positions when I'm like, no, you got to turn this way more.
Mine's really funny about it. He doesn't like talk about it much, but he does he's interested in the process and he wants it, and he really does not want me to sell the one of him behind the palm tree in the waiting room. So
oh, that's sweet.
That's all I got from him was don't sell that one.
Go ahead.
So I'm wondering what your takeaway is. If you're satisfied, if you're left feeling like something wasn't complete that you wish was, or if you're feeling that your leap of faith to trust the intuitive process and the minimal time that you had and the collaborative energy that you had between you was satisfying.
I feel like it was satisfying, but I wanted to produce more than I did, and I'm still disappointed in myself about that.
I feel like everything is perfect in the way it should be. I feel like there isn't anything that could have been different, because if it had been different, it wouldn't reflect the reality of what this life is.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I love this show.
Yay!
I also think about just taking photographs of your children. Back in the day when you had a film camera, you had to develop the photographs when you were making baby books, you know, to pass down to your kids, right? These memories. And now we've got our cell phones filled up with, I don't even know how many, right? You lose those really special moments within your roll of film, and so you get a new phone and you run out of room and whatnot.
Oh, God.
These are like, you say, you know, we feel like it took away from you, your being with your kids, but in a way you're adding to their lives by capturing them in a way that is not common these days.
That's true.
And this takes photographs, like this blows it out of the water. You know, to show a photograph of a painting of your son sitting behind your son or daughter sitting behind a tree, or like
they are very proud of the paintings. They want to tell. They want to
No,
tell
I
you
saw
all
your
about.
kids like that one's me and that one's me and that one's me. Mine was more like.
But no, you guys, seriously, you shouldn't feel guilty at all. In fact, I think you're adding quality to their life by seeing them, capturing that. You're capturing them in a way that no one's ever going to. So
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank
and
you.
these will be around forever. So not lost in some digital world.
That's beautiful.
I'm thinking of a famous essay written by Virginia Woolf called A Room of Her Own, in which it's been years since I've read this, so I might be misremembering it, but I remember correctly, she offers a thought experiment. What if Shakespeare had a sister? But the sister did not have a room of her own in which she could. So I just, it's not so much a question, more it's a comment. I'm thinking, what if she would have tried to create, given the constraints? So one of you had mentioned, is this worth it? Is it given the constraints? Because you could be spending your time doing something else, caring for your children. But I do think it's worth it, because what if Shakespeare had a sister and she did create? What would we have had? So if nothing else, we have this wonderful work. So in those moments where you're thinking, is this worthwhile? I think everybody in this room would think absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.